begin, I would like to acknowledge my gratitude for the chance to work, live, and play on the lands of the Ktunaxa, Sinixt, Sialks, Kwekwe-Tene, and Shaqwapam peoples. We invite you to share the lands you live on and are participating from today in the chat section if you would like. I would like to thank, as ever, the recovery group that is helping to create these sessions and the BC Association of Emergency Managers for supporting and hosting them. The link for BCAEM will be added to the chat section for you. And any resources or information or comments you have to share can be added to the chat section. Summary notes and ideas along with all links shared and presenters' contact info will be sent out to those attending this session. During the presentations, please leave your video and audio turned off as for some attending, it can offer challenges for instability of connection. So on March 10th, we were presented with a variety of perspectives and resources on capacity for supporting communities in recovery. Today we have two presenters who will be speaking about one of the most all-encompassing topics in community recovery, and one that at times doesn't get the airtime that it deserves given its importance. Many people will be fine after an event and will carry on without too much emotional upheaval in their lives, or they won't be affected immediately. Then later on in the recovery process will realize, or not, that they could use some supports to get through and adjust to their new life situations. Some will be triggered by an event and may relive previous traumatic experiences. Each person is different, as is each community. Our presenters offer different perspectives that we hope will give you ideas and resources to access in future regarding emotional and trauma-informed methods and supports for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Our first presenter today will be Emily Dicken. Dr. Emily Dicken has worked as a practitioner in the field of emergency management since 2006 and has held various positions with the province of BC, working in health emergency management and then for Emergency Management BC, as well as with First Nations Health Authority. Now in the role of director with North Shore Emergency Management, Emily works directly for the communities of West Vancouver and North Vancouver to support disaster response and resilience building initiatives. Beyond her work at NSEM, Emily pursues academic interests with a central focus on understanding colonialism as an unnatural and enduring disaster impacting Indigenous communities. When not working, Emily can be found enjoying time in the outdoors with her husband, Jeff, and their two young sons, Keegan and Bowen. And with that, Emily, please go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. I will just screen share. Remember I said I wasn't going to touch anything. I think it's working now. Deb, I don't see you, but can you give me a bit of a thumbs up or let me know that I'm sharing well? Okay, perfect.
Good, thanks.
Well, thanks for the warm introduction, Deb. It is a pleasure to share some of my knowledge and some of the experiences that I've had with everyone over the past few years. And today I'm calling in from the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam territories here on the North Shore. But I make my home in Whistler, BC, on the territories of the Lillooet and Squamish nations, and really just thankful to be able to do this work and do so much of my past work with and alongside First Nation communities. And a little bit about what I'll share with you guys today is really grounded in that experience. So as Deb said, my name's Emily Dicken. I'm a Cree woman of mixed descent. I come from the Little Red River Cree Nation in Alberta on my father's side, and I'm a mixed British descent on my mother's side, but I've spent my entire life living in BC. And really, I've spent my entire career working in the field of emergency management. I knew when I was doing my undergrad that it was a field I wanted to get into. I had some really brief exposures with volunteer work with the Canadian Red Cross, and it just really, really spoke to me as a space to kind of grow professionally and see where the career took me. And it's taken me into realms that I never thought it would. And it's kind of really started to straddle the personal and the professional. And some of that's what I'm going to share with you today. A lot of the work that I'm going to share and my learnings that I'm going to share today come from, started in my academic work with New Chalnoth communities on the west coast of Vancouver Island, but really emerged from that work in terms of my learnings from elders and Indigenous youth that have really helped guide how I see disasters impacting First Nation communities, but where I see the strength and space of support, and the space of wellness and recovery. As Deb said, I'm a mom to 2 young sons and a wife to my husband, Jeff, and we live in Whistler. And I wanted to mention this because it's a really significant part of my own wellness. And I'm going to talk about a bit about this throughout the presentation and towards the end. And I think it's really important that as practitioners, we figure out a way to honor our own wellness, but hold that space. Because I've started to realize that if I didn't uphold that space for myself and in the offices that I was working in, there was really nobody that was going to uphold that for me. So I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. But a lot of my work has to do with really looking at the unnatural disasters of colonialism and how that really transpires through the work of emergency management, through the phases of disasters to create both the beautiful spaces of cultural recovery and cultural continuity, but how it can also create some challenges and barriers as well. So I'm sure many of you are so aware of the disproportionate impacts that affect First Nation communities. I think this picture was taken from the Ashcroft fire in 2017. And I know, so I recognize a lot of your names, and I know so many of you were involved in the events of 2017 and 2018 and in the space of community recovery in so many different ways. But when we really start to dismantle how disasters moved through and how the wildfires specifically moved through the province in 2017 and 2018, they moved through the province with really considerable disproportionate impacts. And the reason for that really has to do with the colonial fabric that set the stage for how First Nations and local governments are structured, from governance structure, from spaces of legislation, and especially legislation that has to do with a risk-based perspective or with emergency management. And so a big piece of this understanding has to do with the loss of land and the placement of reserves under the Indian Act. And since time immemorial, First Nation communities, many First Nation communities were semi-nomadic or nomadic communities, and they would move with seasonal variations, whether it was with regards to subsistence living or whether it was with regards to other seasonal cycles like having winter communities and summer communities. And this was a really significant adaptive change that happened for First Nation communities, where that adaptation was really eroded. And when the reserve system came into effect, essentially it meant that communities became bound to very small parcels of land, and land that really didn't adequately allow for these adaptive strategies. In coupling with that, we also saw during this time different colonial structures of governance and government that essentially imposed non-Indigenous structures or non-traditional structures. And so what we saw was a really strong dependence or interdependence on the Crown and on federal systems of support. And so when we look at the landscape, the present day landscape of local governments, we see really strong tax bases that can actually fuel a lot of mitigative elements, but also a lot of really profound spaces of response and recovery in terms of building back better and building back more adaptive. And when we look at the space in First Nation communities, there's a really strong interdependence on different federal systems and different federal spaces of financial support. And these systems end up fueling these spaces of inequality and this ability to be able to build back better or build back more resilient. And when we look at those strategies around recovery and around resilience building, they're often still done in these very colonial mindsets that really doesn't subscribe to traditional or Indigenous approaches to what better looks like or what wise practices look like. And so when we think about all of these barriers and inequalities, these are examples of what systemic racial inequality looks like through spaces of legislation and through spaces that are imposed by systems and supports that should conceivably be working to support communities in a better way. This is a slide that was shared with me. It was developed by one of my colleagues actually when I was with FNHA out of their interior team. And what they did was they looked at all of the impacts and consequences of disasters that had impacted their interior nations over a series of years, and then looked at it in conjunction with the deterioration of mental health and wellness supports in community, and what that deterioration looked like in the face of compounding and challenging disaster event circumstances across their region. And what they really started to notice was that as these events were impacting and compounding in the communities that they were supporting and servicing, at the same time, there was a drain and deterioration of an ability to provide supports to communities from a health-based and wellness lens. It had to do a lot with responder fatigue. It had to do a lot with overtaxed community services, with a lack of funding in order to keep up with the changes and complexities that were impacting community. And so ultimately what they saw was a really clear erosion of mental health and wellness supports at the community level. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. And what I really wanted to share was kind of the hopeful space of what cultural safety and community recovery looks like. And this is where I think I like to spend a huge bulk of my work. It's really the beauty of community-based space and community-based healing and wellness. But these are all of the things that have come to me in I was going to say the last 5 years, but it's probably closer to 10 years. I always kind of use these incremental years as a way to gauge time, and then I stop adding on to them. But what I'm realizing is that this wisdom and this knowledge that's been shared with me has actually been shared with me for quite a while now. But it's really thinking about the wisdom that comes from the heart of community, and every community holds this wisdom and knowledge and approach in a different way. And so, when we're in the midst of crisis in community, how do we honor the gifts and values and wisdom that communities hold? And sometimes it can very much be that communities are in such a deep space of trauma and crisis that it's really hard to see those gifts or to honor the space of wellness and wisdom and community. And sometimes it means that we need to rely on external supports to help navigate that process. And so in my time at FNHA, I became exposed to a lot of different spaces of wellness that walked along me as a practitioner in this work, but also interfaced with community when they were going through deep spaces of crisis. And what I really found was that it was about looking at traditional medicines and healings and holding that space for it within the process of either whether it was formal debriefing or whether it was a gentler approach to debriefing processes. But I feel as a practitioner that the end result was very much the same. But it was really utilizing spiritual and care practices like smudgings, cedar and hemlock brushings, and really relying on healing practitioners and cultural healers to help do that work, and recognizing that those people are there to walk alongside us as practitioners and communities during responses. And I've often talked to my colleagues at EMBC to think about how to create better accessible supports to organizations like Sultan Laylam, which is an Indigenous wellness organization that supports communities through crisis and trauma, and complementing that with supports and services like the DPS program, which Margareta will be speaking to. And it's really just embracing all of these pieces, from elder care to youth support, and making sure that there's the space to do it well, recognizing that traditional foods play a really integral piece to what wellness looks like in terms of on the land healing. And I've just provided just a few examples there of some of the gifts that have been provided to me in working with community, whether it's moose jerky or smoked salmon, dried berries, and or whether it's a simple act of feasting in community or with community. And I think it is, when I look at all of these pieces together, the wholeness speaks to what on the land on the land recovery and on the land wellness looks like when working in First Nation communities. And it's not something that will ever look the same. And I think when you're out in community, if you're really holding that space, the community will let you know what it is that they need and how they need that support provided. I wanted to share a story that kind of brings this experience to life. And for me, this is a really important story and journey. It has to do with kind of wrapping up some healing for myself from the 2017 wildfire season, and some learning that I had from Indigenous youth along the way. So let's see, when was this? In the spring of 2018, every year I go to a forum through Preparing Our Home, which is a gathering for Indigenous youth to meet with emergency management practitioners and talk about resilience-based strategies and how they can become leaders of resilience in their community. But it's also for youth that have been deeply impacted by disaster, so how they can come together and find some collective space of support. And I was at this session in the spring of 2018, and there were two youth from Bonaparte who had attended, and they'd been so deeply impacted by the fire. They were both responding to the fire as well as supporting their community from the perspectives of recovery after the fact. And they had both decided to stay home from post-secondary school to remain in their community over the fall and spring. And it was a big commitment they were choosing to make for their community. During our time together in a soy youth when we gathered, we had a chance to really talk to these youth about what it meant for them to bring a space of resilience and hope back to their community. And for them, it was really about going into the next fire season and trying to reduce the fear that they felt their community was experiencing, and that they were seeing in their community. And so we talked about things that give these two young men strength. And so they said, well, what gives us strength is being out on the land. And what we would like to do is take other youth out onto the land and do something that, lives our Bonaparte culture and brings us in a space of togetherness and brings us closer to our cultural practices. And so these youth had an idea about doing a moose hunt. And the moose hunt, they wanted to do a moose hunt with elders that could teach them both how to hunt the moose, but then how to use all of the pieces of the moose for the purposes of drying the moose meat and then sealing it so it would go back into people's grab and go kits. So next time that they had to evacuate from their community, they could do it with a tie and connection to their land and a cultural connection to their community, and just feel comforted and supported, and not feel so lost in the space of their evacuation process. And this was the way that kind of these youth felt like they could bring a piece of their own experience and of their own self into something that would prepare and ready their community, but that would also help heal their community from the experiences that they had faced the past year. And so these youth shared this idea. They went home and they were able to action it, but these pictures are actually from the Siksika Nation in Alberta. And there was an elder who had joined this workshop from this nation, and she heard these young men speak and was so inspired by their vision that she went back to her nation, and they had been impacted by a devastating flood. I want to say it was probably in 2016, maybe 2015. And and what she did was she took this inspiration from these youth and brought it to life in her own community. And she was able to use it to help support members of her community who are living in still displaced temporary housing as a result of a flood, to help bring them back together and hold a sense of community and really honor a sense of recovery. And so I think this to me really speaks as a culturally grounded, culturally safe approach to really looking at the full spectrum and space of how we recover from an event and how we really prepare and move forward to face future challenges. And to me, it really speaks to an Indigenous-centric space of what it means to do this work in a good way, and what it really means to meet people where they're at and meet communities where they're at in their journey, both of healing, wellness, and recovery. And it's just for me, it's a super inspiring story to see the passion that youth hold in this work, and when given them the platform and the tools to effectively engage in this work, just how amazing, like how kind of passionate and inspiring things can be. Because I don't think it's anything that anybody could have taken into the community of Bonaparte or into the community of Siksika and actually found the same space of success. But the fact that it came from community and was driven by community was why I think you saw the spaces of inspiration and really a deep space of healing. I'm kind of conscious of time. And so the last thing I really wanted to speak to you guys about was kind of reclaiming a space of wellness for ourselves as practitioners. I don't think I ever really appreciated how exhausting events were until probably a good 3/4 of the way through the 2017 wildfire season. Maybe it wasn't even until we were at the debriefing space. I think I was just in battle mode. And then I really realized how deeply fatigued I was when we started to move through the provincial and regional debriefs. And it almost felt crippling to me. And it was in that time, and my husband at the time, he's still my husband now, but at the time he was with BC Wildfire Service. And I think the two of us were just so extremely exhausted. We had very, very young children at the time. Our youngest was just over 1, or maybe about 1.5. And our oldest was just almost turning 5, or 4, almost turning 4. And it was such a fatiguing time in our life. And we were living in Victoria for work, but it meant that we had no family support near us. We had moved to Victoria simply to be public servants. And so it made me realize that to find my wellness, I needed to be closer to family, and I needed to be closer to a space that fueled a sense of wellness for myself. And that really meant moving back to the mountains. At the time, the province didn't really have a lot of remote work options or spaces for support, but I had an amazing supervisor at the time who saw that I needed some support around wellness and really honored my ability to self-advocate for that. And so I put forward a really thorough strategy of how I could become a teleworker, how I could continue to support the programming, And at the time I was in a position that did allow that flexibility. And I credit EMBC with honoring that for me and really allowing me to authentically find that space of wellness for myself. It was actually life-changing as a practitioner. I recognized when I went into the 2018 wildfire season, I went in with way more support in my home. I also went in with a lot more tools in my toolkit in terms of finding a space of physical outlet, which really allowed me to find, I think, some better emotional grounding. And then when I transitioned to FNHA, it really allowed me to tap into a cultural side of healing and wellness that I had never thought about exploring before. But I encourage each of you that as you go through these dark times, in community, doing the hard work, recognize that for yourself, finding that space of wellness and self-care is critically important. And it wasn't until I kind of hit the burnout space that I found these tools, but I'm actually really thankful that I had, because what I realized is nobody was really going to be able to do it for me. And so as much as people can expose you to the tools, as a practitioner, you need to be able to take those first few steps forward and find a way to utilize them. And so that little picture in the corner is me and my little guys skiing, and it was taken, I don't know, just a few weeks ago. But for me, it just makes me really realize that I need to carve out that time. And it's great to work super intensely and focused and be really present in our work, which I think it often requires. But it's also really important to find that time to shut off and to re-engage in the spaces of life that are really most near and dear to us. So that's everything I wanted to share today, but I'll turn it back over to Deb, and she can drive from here.
Thank you so much, Emily. Wow. I am always impressed and love your storytelling because it always tells so much and shares so much. And particularly thank you for the other perspective of how we can care for ourselves as responders. That was wonderful. And I love all the colorful pictures, of course. Gorgeous. Thank you for that. And we will move on to our next presenter, and then we'll have a Q&A after Margaretta's presentation. Our second speaker today is Margaretta Lund. Margaretta is currently the manager, provincial psychosocial program with HEMBC, Provincial Health Services Authority. She has over 25 years experience in emergency and disaster management in BC. Since 2017, she's been actively engaged in the provision and support of mental health and wellness recovery efforts for disaster impacted communities. Margaretta, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so hi everyone. First, I want to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And thanks, Emily, for your talk. That was great. We're currently working on a lot of our materials and training handouts and the ways that we do things with some of our Indigenous teams and other partners, because we want to make sure that we're also, what we're doing is very much trauma informed and culturally inclusive as well. And I as you spoke, it brought up a lot of things for me to talk about in a bit. So I just wanted to also mention here, I want to acknowledge that mental health, it's you know, as they say, like takes the village, but it's a personal and can be a community effort. We got a lot of organizations in the province that are trying to support us. So as well as the, health authorities and the doing the best they can. I think doctors at BC and the new primary care networks that they're trying to build as well, and of course the Red Cross and CMHA and Salvation Army, when they get out early, are doing their best to help communities as well. FNHA as a health authority, and also my own health authority, provincial health, and Finesse, First Nations Emergency Services can do some CISM work. There's all kinds of, and traditional healers as well. So just to recognize that there's a lot of people that are engaged in this. Quick slide, everybody probably has seen this. It's been around for many, many years, thanks to the work of Ms. Myers way back when, but really it's about, individuals and communities and how they're impacted. But this is really, letting you know that there are so many ups and downs that can happen, and lots of setbacks, and recovery can go on. We got 1 to 3+ years. We know can go some 5 years, some 10 years, if there's some lingering situations, depending on what happened and what everybody's individual circumstances are. And then especially, like as Emily had mentioned, about when you have that compounded trauma and events, and so much that we're really seeing in BC right now. So a lot of what we're doing, or what we provide overall, is based on this kind of concepts in this pyramid, that the majority of people will require less support, so that makes sure that they're having basic services and security, and that their most basic needs are met to begin with. And then as it goes upward, that's when you get into, smaller amounts of people will need more specialized and clinical care. But the bulk comes kind of from the bottom up, and a lot of that is based on what's available in the community, and people that will also come in, but also that the community as a whole working together to really identify. And it's, what is the individual community, what are their circumstances, right? Because everybody, and their history, because it is so different, and that helps you. The more informed you are, the less hazard or risk that there is to traumatize people further as well. So knowing that as much as possible, and all of the groups, I got to say, working together as much as they can, because I know we've experienced this both in communities, and I know in my past life with airports and airline incidents, where people would say they were so difficult for them because so many agencies would come in. They all needed to talk to them, and they would all ask them the same information over and over and over again. And they're saying, at what point do you not share information? And it's fine that we all have our own needs, but really we have to put the needs of the community and the individuals first. So working together the best that we can on that. And I know, actually in Grand Forks it was a good example of that, where a lot of the information that Red Cross had, they were allowed to transfer that information over to the case managers to make sure that all of that knowledge and details, and that was really transferred easily, so we just don't have to keep re-traumatizing people. So so what's happened is we have after the 2017 fires with the ministry, we held some meetings in Victoria with a lot of provincial ministries, NGOs, service providers, and some community members, and to really go over, okay, what's needed in community? How do we best help in an organized way? So that resulted in a sort of a guide, a higher level guide that outlines the cross-provincial senior executives, which I kind of put in brackets, funding, to the local community working groups, and how that all intersects. And from that, we developed a more practical toolkit for communities to act as an operational guide to walk the communities through what would be recommended steps and phases of recovery. So sort of what you're seeing on the screen right now, that, you know, breaking it down, and we've done it in chronological order, and a lot of it revolves around establishing a mental health and wellness working group in the community, and other considerations and supports that would be required in each phase of that community. And we can help communities to do this, to establish those working groups, but the best that communities can do a bit of homework themselves to know a lot of this in advance, of course, is very, very helpful. So this is just an example of what it would look like. So in that immediate few days, you know, what are your considerations? What activities would you have in the targeted population, and then who might be your service providers? So quite a bit of information within that toolkit. And as I said, we, you know, are more than happy to walk a community through this, and preferably to do that well before an event actually happens. So I'll give you a link for this, but also my information as well. Anybody wants to contact me once they have a copy of that. So moving on, so disaster psychosocial, as Emily had mentioned us, so we do have our disaster psychosocial volunteers, and most of them have a very strong clinical background in mental health, and we do a lot of work with actually providing psychological first aid to the people in community when we do arrive, but also we do training beforehand to help, especially people like with ESS and others. Sometimes first responders come to have an understanding of what psychological first aid is, and how best to support that. So we'll also do those assessments, outreach advocacy. I remember in Grand Forks, one of our guys, he said, you know, there's a few people that have been thrown out of the motels, so he went back and actually, you know, talked them back in, you know, let them back in. They're actually pretty good guys, and they'll behave. But, you know, also going out in the field with bottles of water and just talking to people, finding them where they're at. So not necessarily waiting for them to come into resilience centers, going out on their own as well. And we, you know, stress management sessions, all kinds of educational materials as well. But we're there to, you know, help community members, but also to help the helpers. So in this case, it was talking to military that was on site, but it also can be ESS, it can be in the EOC as well, because we know how difficult it can be, and the mental stress for those making those tough decisions under such, you know, difficult situations in the EOC. Right now during COVID, this has changed a little bit. We can still respond on site and have done so, but there's also some telephone support that's available as well. So always best to, you know, just check in with us, but make sure that, you know, don't hesitate, put it that way, during COVID situation to reach out to us, because there's a lot that we can and are still doing. So we also have, for those of you who don't know, the Provincial Mobile Response Team is part of our, what are we, I guess, department within a department. So the Mobile Response Team, they were formulated to help through with overdose situations and opioids, but they are crisis intervention specialists, and so they have been doing a lot of education sessions as well, and they will help to support the DPS team. So quite often, and because these are regular staff members, whereas DPS volunteers are a lot of clinicians who, you know, may take time for them to get out of their own practice and their own jobs to go out in the field. So they can supplement and support, and have been doing that. And that's been incredibly valuable. So because they are highly trained and you know, critical incident stress, but also psychological first aid. So absolutely no problem that they can help out. And they've also been doing a number of things with healthcare workers and long-term care homes as well, because there's just been so much stress going on. So here's some contact information, and I show that again later on as well. So I wanted to mention the crisis lines because I think there's still a heck of a lot of people out there that are still not aware of the crisis lines and what mental health supports are available to them. So in most communities now, you can if you're on your computer, Google 211 and go to 211 and find out who's in your community, but can also call the crisis lines because they do help you to engage with further mental health support. So a lot of people think, you know, the crisis lines, it's, oh no, I don't want to do that. They think that's like calling 911, and there'll be a big, you know, I don't want to have an impact on the system. I'm not bad enough, but that's really not true. So there's local numbers or regional numbers, but there's also this mental health support line, the 310-6789, and there's also an Indigenous specific line. Although, you know, feel free, you don't have to call the Indigenous line, but I think that's comforting for a lot of people to know that that exists as well. And they can, you know, transfer you within in between April and August of 2020, the Lower Mainland crisis lines, they safely de-escalated the 34, almost 3,500 suicide-related calls, and that's in a handful of months. So it's about 700 a month. And you know, it's just amazing the work that they do. But that, you know, is the suicide line that they can transfer you to. But with the mental health, like I say, you don't have to have be, you know, in a critical condition to do that. You can call them to you know, have a talk. And you know, this is why we try to promote this so much. So we've got a lot of stock on these cards. There's a lot of information on the back of them as well, and further numbers. So anybody wants more of these cards and posters, let me know, and we can certainly send you out that, because they're pretty good to have at reception centers or resilience centers as well. So Text for Hope, this is another, it's fairly new, but it's from Alberta, and they've been using this for quite some time in different circumstances. They have a special program now, just COVID related, but they have used it after different disaster situations, so with the floods and the fires as well. So I've been wanting to bring this to BC for a long time, and finally found a little bit of money and just kind of jumped on this. So Text for Hope BC. So all you would have to do is type Hope BC to that number 393939, and it automatically registers you to say to receive on a cell phone, to receive daily, 7 days a week, text messages on the same time every day. And these are just supportive messages every day. They're a little bit different, and they've shown this is an evidence-based program, and shown that it really has helped a lot with stress, anxiety, and some levels of depression as well. So I know I've been receiving them for a very long time now. because I've been on a number of pilots, and one day it was like an hour late, and I'm like, oh my God, where's my message? And so it really does make you feel connected to something as well. But all these messages, they're just short, positive messages done by psychologists and psychiatrists, and the only piece in it is that where there is a bit of a health survey. So there's nothing personal about your name, but it's just to get some demographics and also a baseline of where the person is. So because that's the only way we can measure whether this program has been successful or not. And there's a lot of traction with this. I'm on a call, I think it's tomorrow, but I'm doing a number of sessions with different groups in potential funding groups, different ministries in BC, and also now there's a lot of interest on going national, and it is available in a number of different languages. So I think it's really gonna to grow. So this program that I have up right now, it's going till the end of 2020, and I have enough for about 4,000 people. Now, we started in the Caribou, but it's been slow uptake. It's difficult if I'm not there. I can't print out these posters and put them up all over the place, but feel free. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to fill, and if it fills, it proves that there is a need. So I'm not so, guarded about it as I was worrying about how quickly it can fill. I'd rather see the seats filled than not be filled. But anybody else want to talk more about that can let me know. But I think you will see more of this in the future. So going forward, copies of the documents, so that toolkit, I've got a link for that, but it's also available for me, and lots of the posters and stuff available, and contextualize. If anybody does look at the toolkit and wants to think about how they can use it or have any questions, please reach out, because we're happy to help you with that. And part of this is that we would be available to come out if you had to actually, you are in a disaster situation and want to organize this in the community, that we're there to help you with that. Future collaboration, we're doing more work together, which is great. So with Red Cross, with Canadian Mental Health, MBC, I had a great talk again with FNHA, and I've gone out with some FNHA people in different regions to reach out to community in the past. So we want to maintain and improve a lot of these relationships. We're doing more online courses, and want to have more collaborative voices at the provincial table going forward. And I've got a meeting with the new executive director with EMBC that we'll be talking in the near future. So I'm feeling quite hopeful about a lot of what we're doing with this in the province going forward. So, and just a quick plug here for a number of these different resources. Anybody want to take pictures of this? But Living Life to the Full, that before has been a course that you would have to pay for, but it's currently free. I think the province is giving a bit of money over to CMHA to promote that and to make sure that people can attend that for free. So that's a good time to do that. And the next one in red, that link will let you know a lot about what CMHA is doing with that. Bounce Back, that's, people who've had a tough time with depression. They can do online phone coaching. Before, you used to have to be referred by a doctor, but I don't think that's the case right now. And they've upped their capacity for that as well. So good time to take advantage of that. The FNHA page And at the top on this slide, they've just got so much on there. It's really amazing. I'm quite impressed with that. And with Indigenous Services Canada, their community support fund, that's all outlined on their page as well. So lots of good stuff there. It just goes on and on. So BC government has all kinds of goodies. I always list this Wellness Together Canada because it's one of my favorites because I use it. So I went in and I registered for this. You can just Google Wellness Together Canada type of thing. And it sends me an email every couple of weeks and asks me just a handful of questions that I answer. And then it shows me a graph and sort of rates me on how I'm doing. And I've been tracking this for a long time now, and it's very yeah, it's been great. I did it again just this morning, and it kind of when I think, gee, I'm doing a lot better, and then I look at the graph and I go, oh, there was a period of time that I was doing even better than I am now. What was happening then? It's just, yeah, it's just terrific. Plus they have a plethora of resources for that as well, and of course, you know, the general crisis line, the Indigenous line, the text program, and another great thing that I'll say about that text program, it's because a lot of us people are just, who the heck wants to sort through all of these links? Although that's why I say you don't have to go to all of them. It's whatever appeals to you. But this one, you don't have to go to anything. Once you're registered, that nice message, affirming message comes every morning direct to your cell phone, and a lot of us have cell phones, so just another plug for that. So there's also this which would work for anyone understanding stress injury and enhancing resiliency. So this is something that we've done and is up on our mobile response team did this. It's up on YouTube right now that you can have a look at that, but it's great. Anybody can benefit from this. It's really, you know, more once again about that self-care, what are you going to do and how to really kind of monitor yourself, and lots of good tips on that. So I provided that link, and then this horrible long link for the toolkit that unfortunately we're trying to work with our communications group to get a better, shorter web page, but we're not there yet. So you can either contact me directly if you want it, or if you're brave enough to copy this or take a picture of it and go forward with that, or if you want a copy of the slides, you can be sent that, and then you can, you know, do the open the hyperlink directly as well. So but lots to help you with, and we're happy to help. So yeah, I think that's all I have. Oh yeah, a little bit more. Last one, once again, about ways to contact us and myself as well at the bottom. So please feel free to take a snapshot of that as well. And that's all I got. So I hope I haven't gone over. Thanks.
Wow. Thanks so much, Margaretta. You are a wealth of information. We will, I see Alexa's been adding these links to the chat session, and they will go out with the summary notes.
Yes, hello.
Everyone that is participating today, we will have them along with your contact info so they can find you again.
Okay, yes, I got, when the invitation, the link came, it did say 2:30.
Hello?
Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Hello. So thank you both, Emily and Margaretta, for those wonderful presentations. Are there any, oh, Peter has a question already. Thank you, Peter. For Emily, you mentioned the youth of the community taking the lead in recovery. Is there a growing number of people getting into this work in BC?
I mean, it's hard to speak to the full spectrum of BC. You know, I guess if I look at it over the spectrum of a handful of years, I think of various initiatives that are taking place, especially for Indigenous youth, that are bringing youth into this work. But I think it's somewhere that needs to continue to grow. Like, how do we create mentorship opportunities for people entering the career? How do we create those entry-level positions so that, you know, well, when people are stepping into roles, they can get the appropriate level of support and expertise and learning that they need. And in some ways, the 2017 and 2018 fires were exceptional for that, because it allowed EMBC to bring on auxiliary teams and auxiliary staff, and it allowed people that otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to jump into the career that opportunity. But it has been challenging. It's why my colleague Lily Yamagalova and myself created Preparing Our Home, which is a not-for-profit for Indigenous youth who've been impacted by disaster. And the only reason why we built it was because we didn't see any space for Indigenous youth to enter the conversation, or any really specific supports and services that really met youth-based needs for on the land healing and recovery. So I think slow and steady, I guess, but I think it's up to all of us as leaders in our work to open those spaces up for younger people.
Thanks, Emily. That's good news to hear. Margaretta, I have a question for you about the psychosocial first aid. How long is that course, and are you able to do it by Zoom because you can't do it in person?
Yeah,
Is that
they're,
being done?
they're working on the online course right now to make that a much, because normally it's something that they would do in person, and oh gosh, yeah, quite often there can be a lot, so it's usually a full day, and then we have lunch and stuff. So yeah, they are working on that, so we'll let you know when that's ready.
That would be great, because I've been trying to get that up in our area for quite a while. That would be wonderful. Thanks. Are there any other questions for our two presenters at the moment? Don't see any coming in or hearing any. I will just add a couple of messages at the end here. One moment. Okay. Regarding, thank you to both of you, by the way, wonderful presentations and tons of really good and interesting information. Very much appreciated on that. The sixth and final session in this series on April 7th will offer information, examples, and resources from a person well-versed in communication methods and practices for community recovery. This will be followed by a Q&A. And after that, there will be some extra time for discussion in smaller groups about what you might like to see going forward that would help you in better understanding, coordination, collaboration for carrying out effective community recovery in your own communities. So we hope you can join us for that session. That'll be 1:30 till 3 on the 7th of April. And if you know of others who have taken part in any of the other sessions, or who haven't but would like to join, invite them along. The link will go out next week sometime for that one. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will talk to you again for the final presentation in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Deb. Good to see you, Emily.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.